It's that time of year when teachers are starting to think about professional development and continuing education courses for the summer. I am so excited to announce that the Savvy Dance Teacher Applied Dance Science Teacher Training course is back again for another year. It's happening September 1st and 2nd in the Vancouver area, and registration is now open. For those of you who may not know, the Savvy Dance Teacher is a 2-day in-person practical course that covers the latest in applied dance science topics. If you're looking to incorporate more injury prevention, functional anatomy, active mobility, strength and conditioning, and lots of other stuff into your teaching, this is the course for you. For more information, check out www.allegroperformance.com/thesavvydanceteacher. And if you use the code SAVVYEB before July 1st, you can save $100 off your registration. And now, here's today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erika Mayall. Today, we are going to chat about cross-training for dancers, and specifically because this has been coming up a lot in the clinic of people who are starting to think about what their plans are for the summer, and especially if maybe they're taking a little bit of a break from dance and actually have some time off in the summer, which is amazing. Yay, we want dancers to have an off season. But then people are asking, what is the best cross-training for dancers, or the best sort of thing that they should be doing in the summer? So that is what we are going to dive into today, is cross-training and what the best cross-training for dancers is. And like I said, I get asked this question a lot, and the wording or the phrasing is almost always, what is the best cross-training? And my answer maybe sounds a little bit cheeky, and it's not meant to be, but quite honestly, the best cross-training for dancers is the activity that they are actually going to do. And I'm going to get into that a bit more later in the episode, because before we can even dive into that and really dissect what that means, we need to know what cross-training actually is, or even what it is we're trying to accomplish with cross-training. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the terminology of cross-training. They've heard people talk about cross-training. Dancers maybe even know that cross-training is important, but if we actually start to dissect what it is or really dive into what it is, we may not always be on the same page. So essentially what cross-training is participating in a physical activity that is being used as training that utilizes different muscle groups and different movement patterns than those typically used in dance. So I'm going to say that again. Cross-training is an activity that utilizes different muscle groups and different movement patterns than those that are typically used in dance. And generally, the goal of cross-training is to develop overall fitness. It can be to minimize injury risk. It can function to sort of prevent or address imbalances that might develop when we're participating a lot in one form of training, i.e. in dance. And it often is really helpful as well to decrease the amount of burnout that we see in athletes of all sports or genres, so not just in dance. But if we have athletes who are training intensely and at high levels in one particular sport, we do see higher rates of burnout than people who participate in multiple activities. So cross-training can help to reduce some of that burnout just by having more variety in our training. I think for dancers, the really important thing to differentiate is cross-training from what I often term supplementary training, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as supplemental training, or There's all sorts of different words that are used, but that is a different type of training. And so we see commonly in dance that dancers, if I ask them about cross-training or what types of other training they are doing outside of dance, they will report activities that in my mind are actually much more supplementary training as opposed to cross training. So some examples of these might be things like PBT, which is the progressive ballet technique, or Pilates, or some forms of yoga, or even just stretch and strength type classes that might be part of a studio's curriculum. More often than not, those are going to fall into what we term supplementary training as opposed to cross-training. And the reason for that is because if we come back to that definition of what cross-training is utilizing generally different muscle groups and different movement patterns than those that are used in dance. And those supplementary training programs are usually utilizing the same muscle groups in the same or very similar movement patterns than what is used in dance. So you can see how it might not count as cross-training because it doesn't have that benefit of providing a more well sort of rounded, I don't know if that's the right term, but a training environment that is different from the dance training environment. And people always come at me anytime I talk about this and sort of say, oh, but what about X? What about Y? What about Z? They have like very specific situations. Well, when I teach these classes, I always include this. Therefore, that's cross-training, right? As opposed to supplementary training. And there's certainly crossover. You could be teaching a stretch and strength class, for instance, or whatever it is. And yeah, maybe you're including things like squats in parallel. So maybe that could be counted as cross-training because maybe it is different than us working in a turned out position all of the time. So I'm not saying that none of it counts as cross-training because some of it may, but more often than not, when I talk with dancers about what types of either supplementary training or cross-training they're participating in, it more often than not falls more heavily in supplementary training than it does into that cross-training category. And again, when we think about those benefits of the benefits of cross-training, when we're looking at, preventing burnout or addressing different imbalances that develop because of the movement patterns we commonly use in dance and minimizing injury risk and those types of things, we generally need the movement patterns and the muscle groups to be different enough from dance for us to get those benefits. So I'm not saying there is anything wrong with supplementary training at all. And a lot of dancers use it and it can be super helpful. And quite honestly, when we are doing rehab with dancers and we're working on, getting a dancer back into the studio and we're giving them personalized rehabilitation programs and all of those types of things, those more often than not actually look a lot like supplementary training because we are specifically building that dancer back up for dance-specific skills. So it's going to look a lot like that. There's probably elements of what would be considered more cross-training thrown in there as well, but it's often going to look very much like supplementary training. So I am not saying there's anything wrong with supplementary training before all of you come at me and sort of say, but my dancers do Pilates and it helps their dancing and whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying it's different than cross-training and we need to know what those differences are so we know what we're talking about and what we're actually participating in. All right, I'll get off my soapbox about that, and we're going to go back to that original question then of what is the quote-unquote best cross-training for dancers. So, like I said, the best cross-training for dancers is going to be an activity or multiple activities that they actually want to participate in and actually enjoy doing. There are so many different types of cross-training that it doesn't have to look the same for every dancer. And it probably depends a little bit on what some of your goals are. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But if we have a dancer and we're saying, okay, I really want this dancer to participate in I don't know, let's say swimming as an activity because it's different than dance. And this dancer absolutely hates swimming. They don't like getting in the water. They don't like having to like shower and wash their hair afterwards. They don't like the feeling of being wet. They get cold in the water. Whatever it is, if we're prescribing swimming as their cross-training activity, chances are they are not going to participate in it. And then we're not getting any of the benefits of cross-training. So I would much rather see a dancer participating in cross-training like with an activity that they actually enjoy than prescribing what is perceived to be the quote-unquote best or perfect cross-training activity for that dancer. This is sometimes tricky because a lot of dancers don't actually like participating in much of anything else. And so sometimes when I'm having these conversations with dancers, a lot of them, and maybe it's why they gravitated to dance in the first place, but a lot of them don't like more traditional cross-training type activities. So if we think of things like swimming or cycling or running or those types of activities, a lot of dancers don't necessarily enjoy those. So sometimes we do need to think outside the box a little bit because, again, the best activity is going to be the one that they actually somewhat enjoy so that they will participate in it regularly. So then if we are thinking of, okay, what is an activity that they enjoy, or maybe there's no activities they enjoy, so we're starting to, again, think outside the box a little bit, we can start to dive into a bit what our goals are with that cross-training activity. And especially if we're thinking about cross-training in the summer months. And again, this question's been coming up recently a lot in the clinic with people starting to think about what their summer is going to look like. And so maybe we think about this more, call it more sort of like off-season training, but we can still just call it cross-training. It doesn't really matter what we're calling it. And cross-training can be happening at any time in the year as well. But in terms of what our goals are when we're looking at picking the sort of quote-unquote best activity, is one of your goals to increase cardiovascular fitness? We know from research that dance alone does not elicit enough of a physiological response from a cardiovascular perspective to actually improve dancers' cardiovascular fitness unless we are very intentionally designing a class or designing exercises to actually go after that. Generally, the way we train and dance and the way class and things are structured, we are not improving our cardiovascular fitness. So maybe we are picking a cross-training activity specifically to look at our cardiovascular fitness. So then we're going to look at more aerobic type activities. So maybe we start to look at cycling, whether that be stationary cycling or outdoor cycling. Maybe we're looking at swimming. Maybe we're looking at running. Maybe we're looking at other cardiovascular machines. Like maybe we have a dancer who actually enjoys going to the gym and cardiovascular fitness is one of their goals. So then we might utilize like a rowing machine, a stair, like a stepper, what are they called? Stairmaster, stair machines, whatever. An elliptical trainer, those types of equipment can be utilized if that is an option for that dancer. So you can see where there's a lot of variety that can be brought in or a lot of different options. Like I often will have a dancer who's like, I absolutely hate running. There's no way I'm ever going to run. Like, don't even ask me to. And depending on the dancer, maybe running is not the best choice of activities. If we have a dancer who already does a lot of impact and a lot of jumping, maybe we don't want to be adding more of that type of impact to their training program. But perhaps they really enjoy cycling. Maybe they really like getting on their bike and exploring their neighborhood and going for like outdoor like road cycling. Maybe they like stationary cycling or spin classes or things like that. So we can take their preferences into account, knowing what the goal of that cross-training activity might be. Other goals that we might have in terms of the benefits of cross-training or other goals that we might be looking at, a lot of dancers will report that they want to improve their strength. and especially as like an off-season goal when they're thinking about off-season training plans. So if we're thinking about strength and that's the primary goal of our cross training, we need to incorporate strength training type activities. So if we have a dancer and their goal is strength, then cycling's probably not the best choice of activity for them or the right choice, because cycling is not going to generally improve our strength. It is more of a cardiovascular fitness activity. So if we're thinking about strength, maybe this dancer needs to look at more traditional weightlifting or strength training in a gym. We sometimes can get strength responses using just body weight exercises, but generally that stimulus is not going to be enough for our dancers. For certain movement patterns and certain muscle groups, it may be, at least as a starting point, but more often than not, we need to look at eventually then using more of an external load. And so whether that is using weight machines at a gym, using free weights, using resistance bands, using kettlebells, using all sorts of different equipment that we have access to, that might be what their cross-training program looks like, is a more traditional gym-based strength training or weightlifting type program. We can also look at other strength type activities that maybe don't look so much like a traditional gym program. So I had a dancer, this was a couple years ago, I want to say 2 summers ago, might have even been 3 summers ago, but a dancer who was really interested in improving their upper body strength specifically, and they didn't love a traditional gym setting. Like that was not like really how they wanted to spend their time, but they did really, really like rock climbing and bouldering. And so that was like an awesome activity to choose as a cross-training activity to specifically look at functional upper body strength. If that dancer's goal or what they were wanting to achieve through cross-training had been lower body strength, rock climbing's probably not going to elicit strength responses in that same way. So again, we really need to know what our goal is with cross-training in terms of picking an activity that then is going to elicit those responses. Some people are going to use cross-training, and especially in the off-season, more as just a way to stay connected to health and fitness. So maybe you don't have any specific goals in terms of, improving cardiovascular fitness, improving strength, improving jump height, like those types of really specific goals. Maybe it's more just, I just want to kind of stay active and stay a little bit in shape and stay feeling healthy and those types of things. In which case, again, pick activities that you like. Maybe it's going stand-up paddleboarding, maybe it's going for a run, maybe it's going for a hike in the forest. It could be any of those activities if you don't have as specific physical goals, if that makes sense. So if your goal is more just stay active, stay healthy, and, do different activities that are cross-training from dance, then again, the actual exact activity doesn't matter too much in terms of what it is that you're focusing on. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea and some sort of food for thought in terms of what your cross-training might look like, especially with the summer coming up soon. But also, cross-training is really important for us to continue during the dance season as well. So our recommendations are that dancers be participating in cross-training activities. And we have different recommendations in terms of the amount of cross-training, depending on the age group of the dancer and like what your training load for dance is. And I'm not going to get too much into the trenches of this right now, but just in general, for our younger dancers or youngest dancers, so let's say 10 and under, or kind of adolescent growth spurt and under, we generally just want to encourage those dancers to continue to participate in multiple athletic activities. And so we call these multi-sport athletes a lot of the time. Sometimes dancers don't identify with that terminology specifically, but we want to encourage dancers to still participate in other things. So maybe they're taking swimming lessons. Maybe they're just riding their bike in their neighborhood with friends. Maybe they play on another team sport, soccer, basketball, hockey, things like that. We want to encourage those dancers to continue to be multi-sport athletes. As dancers get older and potentially are going to end up specializing more particularly in dance, so maybe they're not playing another sport at the same time, then we need to intentionally be incorporating cross-training into their training week or training programs. And for those dancers, the general rule, and this is very general, but the general rule is we should be doing approximately 1 hour of cross-training for every 5 hours of dance that we have in a week. So if we have a dancer who's training, let's say 15 hours in a week, they should be doing about 3 hours of cross-training type activity. Again, the exact activity that they're doing might look different depending on what their goals are and, what their goals are. So maybe that looks like some really structured cross training. Maybe they really intentionally go to the gym and are doing like a structured strength training program a couple of times a week, but it could be less structured than that. And if we're just using it to mitigate injury risk and, address muscle imbalance and things like that, it doesn't necessarily need to be as structured. And then it could look like going for a hike once a week, going for a bike ride once a week, going swimming once a week, whatever it looks like. So it doesn't always have to be super structured, but the general recommendation is 1 hour of cross-training activity per every 5 hours of dance training. I realize that sometimes that is really tricky to fit into our dance training schedules. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's important for studios to be aware of this and the people who are designing and setting the timetables for dancers so that we can very purposefully build schedules that allow dancers to also participate in activities outside of the studio or these cross-training type activities. All right. I think that's all I'm going to say about the kind of recommendations for the amount of cross-training. But like I said, and sort of have been referring to throughout, the best cross-training for dancers is going to be an activity that you enjoy / maybe tolerate if there isn't something that you truly enjoy, but something that you enjoy the most compared to other activities, because then you will actually complete it and participate in it. And then beyond that, knowing what our goals are from cross-training from a more like physical and physiological standpoint, that might steer us in a specific direction as well in terms of cross-training activities. But honestly, the most important thing is that dancers are actually doing it. And so I would rather have a dancer participating in a, sort of maybe, again, in quotation marks, less than ideal cross-training activity, but they're doing it really regularly, than somebody who has the best designed cross-training program ever, but they're actually just never doing it because they hate it. So trying to really find that activity that you enjoy or can learn to enjoy is really beneficial in being able to reap the rewards of cross-training and how that can enhance our dance training. All right. That's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me through my email, which is in the show notes, or at Dance Physio Erika on social media. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.